All right, welcome back from the short break. We're ready to start again. Now it's the turn of the next talk, who is from Professor Marco Pavone and a student of his, Devansh Jalota. Something about them. So Marco is an associate professor of aeronautics and astronautics at Stanford University, and there he is the director of the Autonomous Systems Lab and the co-director of the Center for Automotive Research. Also is currently on a partial leave of absence at NVIDIA, serving as the director of autonomous vehicle research. So he received a PhD degree in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT in 2010, and his main research interests are in the development of methodologies for the analysis, design, and control of autonomous systems, all the way from self-driving cars, design of the cars, to analysis of the future mobility systems. He is a recipient of a big number of awards. I won't list all of them. I care about saying one, which is cool, is the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers from President Barack Obama. And the second one, it's also that I want to mention, is that he was recognized as one of the America's 20 most highly promising investigators under the age of 40. And now, those were good old times where it was under the age of 40, but still it did pretty amazing work. Devansh, on his end, is a PhD student in computational and mathematical engineering in Marco's lab. And prior to joining Stanford, received his Bachelor of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering and a Bachelor of Arts in Applied Mathematics with highest distinctions. His work, and also the topic of today's talk, is focused on the development of incentive schemes and market mechanisms for society to enable a smooth uptake of socially aware traffic routing strategies. So today the talk will be split between the two, and I'm very happy to give the stage to both of them. So guys, go ahead. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Joelle, for hosting us, and thank you very much for your introduction that I really appreciate it, except for your joke about my venerable age, I would say. Devansh, would you mind sharing the presentation?
Yep.
All right, today, together with Devansh Jalota, who is a PhD student in my lab, we're going to talk a little bit about our recent work on including equity objectives in the control of transportation systems. Next. So to give just a bit of context, the main research direction in my lab is to design analysis and coordination algorithms for future mobility systems enabled by 5 main technologies: vehicle sharing, specific purpose vehicle design, enabling micromobility services, connectivity in terms of real-time demand prediction and system-wide fleet optimization, electrification, and of course, autonomous vehicle technologies. Next. So in this context, we are currently working on 4 main topics. First, devising data-driven routing and scheduling algorithms for mobility on-demand systems by merging techniques from optimal control and machine learning. Second, devising coordination algorithms for mobility on-demand systems that account for the interplay with other infrastructures, such as public transit and the power grid. Third, and this is indeed will be the core of the presentation today, we're investigating ways to include equity objectives in the control of transportation systems. For example, by rethinking traditional coordination mechanisms such as congestion pricing. And finally, to control a transportation system, one has to observe such a system. But observing the system might trigger privacy concerns. Therefore, a key challenge for the control of a societal system is the apparent clash between the objective of gaining granular information about the system as desired for control and the goal of preserving the privacy of users. So in this context, we're investigating how to leverage cryptographic and differential privacy techniques to enable privacy and making sure that the privacy is preserved, while also achieving a performance metric for the control algorithms that we devise. So with that introduction, I will now leave the stage to Devansh, who is going to talk in detail about our third research dimension in this field, which is that of including equity objectives in the control of transportation system.
Sounds great. Thank you, Marco, and thank you, Joelle, for inviting us and for the kind introduction. So yeah, as Marco mentioned, I will talk more about our research activities in the context of equity in transportation systems. So as we all know, traffic congestion is very much a ubiquitous problem in daily travel in most large urban metropolises all across the world. And one of the popular mechanisms that has been devised in order to alleviate some of these issues of traffic congestion has been that of congestion pricing, wherein tolls are placed on certain roads of the traffic network, with the idea being that if we increase the costs for travelers to use those roads, then we can effectively decrease the overall traffic volume through those roads, thereby reducing traffic congestion. However, one of the major issues with congestion pricing has been its limited real-world deployment. In particular, it has only been the case that very few select cities across the world have really adopted congestion pricing in its fullest form. And one of the major issues with that has been the resulting social inequity concerns, because congestion pricing has the effect of effectively pricing out the less wealthy sections of society from using roads that they were originally being able to use. And this has led to a large amount of public opposition, which has led to limited deployment in practice. And this is essentially where the main motivation for our work, as what we focus on, or what we have focused on for the last couple of years in our lab, has been to try to look at congestion pricing schemes from a different lens, which is from the perspective of equity, such that we can devise these congestion pricing schemes to not only get its efficiency gains in terms of reduced traffic congestion, but also try to achieve this equity goal of sustainable transportation. And today in this talk, I'll present two works that we have done along these lines. The first one being that on balancing fairness and efficiency in traffic routing. And I'll define very formally what I mean by fairness in that context. And we do that using a method which we developed called the interpolated traffic assignment. And so that's as far as the first work is concerned. And the second work that I will describe will focus on congestion pricing from a slightly different perspective, wherein we're not just looking to set tolls on the different roads of our traffic network, but here we're going to look at congestion pricing through the lens of refunding the collected toll revenues to the right groups of users, and essentially seeing if we can design these so-called congestion pricing with revenue refunding schemes that can simultaneously achieve both efficiency and equity objectives. So without, I guess, further dwelling on this, I'll just go straight to the first topic, which is on balancing fairness and efficiency in traffic routing. So in particular, I'm going to start by just a motivating example, just to highlight to you the different fairness and efficiency notions that we particularly care about in this context. So let's suppose that we want to route 5 users between San Jose and San Francisco. And so the total flow that we must route on these two, the green and the red routes, must add up to 5. And let's just suppose that the travel time on the green route is a function of its flow given by 2x1 squared, and the travel time on the red route is a constant of, let's say it's 50, right? So in this particular setting, if we impose no form of regulations in our system, that is no form of pricing, then in this case, users would tend to selfishly minimize their individual travel times, which would result in a traffic pattern wherein every single user would end up using the green route. And this particular outcome is what we call a user equilibrium, wherein no individual user would have an incentive to deviate to the red route because they would not be able to improve their costs by moving to the red route. And however, one of the main issues with sort of the user equilibrium is that it leads to exceedingly large system travel times. As you can observe that we've routed every single user on the same route. And I'm going to denote the total system travel time as FSO of X, which will be clear shortly. In this particular context, it's going to lead to a total travel time of 250, as we have 5 users on the green road, all incurring a travel time of 50 units. Now, what one can imagine is that, well, if we had better distributed the vehicles among the 2 different roads, we could have potentially gotten improved efficiency outcomes in terms of reduced traffic. And in fact, what we can do is we can use mechanisms such as marginal cost pricing to, in fact, enforce something called the system optimum solution, wherein we in fact, minimize the total travel time of all users in the system. So for instance, a better distribution of vehicles that you can think of in this setting would have been to just route 3 users on the green route and 2 on the red route. And the eventual outcome of this would be that we would be able to improve our total travel time in our system significantly, from 250 all the way down to 154. So essentially, the bottom line here is that we can use pricing mechanisms to potentially get significant efficiency gains, as we see in this example. However, there's one important thing that we want to be wary of in this particular context, which is that while we have achieved gains for the system as a whole, what we have done in the process is we've, to some extent, compromised sort of the travel times of certain users to make other users in some sense better off. So in this context, if we see the users on the green road are incurring a travel time of just 18, whereas the users on the red road are incurring a travel time of 50, which is almost, if we look at it, the users on the red road are incurring almost 3 times the travel time to that of users on the green road, which in some sense can be interpreted very much as a significant fairness concern, especially as it would be the lower income sections of society which would have to bear the brunt of the longer travel times. So just to summarize everything I spoke about in this example, what we observe here are 2 extreme solutions, the user equilibrium and the system optimum, which clearly reveals an efficiency fairness trade-off. So in particular, the user equilibrium, as we saw, was fair in that it led to the same travel times for users, but it led to an inefficient outcome, whereas the system optimum solution was efficient, but it led to a significantly unfair outcome. And this is which brings us to the essential point of this work, which is to try to resolve this trade-off by developing an algorithmic approach to find fairness constrained flows in practice, while combining that with the road tolling scheme in a manner such that we can try to balance both efficiency and fairness within the context of traffic routing. So I'll move on now to some of our methods, but before doing so, I just want to more, I guess, in more formally just point out what our performance metrics are that we're going to use, which is that of efficiency and fairness. So in particular, we're going to define the efficiency of a traffic assignment, which is given by a vector of edge flows through something which we call an inefficiency ratio, which is just going to take in a vector of edge flows and simply compute the ratio between the total travel time of the traffic assignment X divided by the total travel time of the system optimum traffic assignment. And note that this particular quantity must be always larger than 1, or at least must be at least 1, primarily because the system optimum traffic flow by definition has the lowest system cost within society. So that's the efficiency metric. As far as the fairness metric is concerned, we're going to measure it with a quantity which we define as the unfairness, which is going to take in a vector of path flows in our system and compute the maximum across all OD pairs of the ratio of the travel times of the users between that OD pair, right? So this is the notion of fairness that we use, and it's essentially just a generalization of the notion that I presented in the simple example I presented earlier of the 2 links in the Bay Area. So with our definitions in place of fairness and efficiency, what we can hope to do is, if we want to try to balance both of these metrics, we can construct a problem which we call the beta unfair system optimum, wherein our objective is to minimize the total travel time in the system. However, we're going to add in an unfairness constraint. So we want to, in some sense, maximize efficiency or minimize our travel time while making sure that our unfairness is no more than some parameter beta. And you can think of beta as a parameter that is being controlled by, say, a traffic authority or a central planner that seeks to maintain a certain level of fairness in the system. So essentially, through this particular problem, what we're doing is we're maximizing efficiency in our objective, and we are embedding fairness through the constraints of the problem. Now, the fundamental issue with solving the problem I presented here is that the unfairness constraints are in general non-convex, and thus solving this problem is computationally very challenging. So what we're going to develop is an algorithmic approach to efficiently solve essentially, we're going to develop a heuristic that is efficiently solvable and show that it computes a pretty good solution to this particular problem. So in particular, our approach is going to leverage this, the fundamental insight that I already mentioned earlier, that the system optimum traffic assignment, which is given by the solution of this particular problem, is the most efficient possible traffic assignment, though it's unfair. And on the other hand, the user equilibrium traffic assignment, which is given by the solution of the following convex program, it is inefficient, but it is completely fair. And so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to try to leverage both these properties of the system optimum and user equilibrium traffic assignment and try to achieve the best of both worlds. And the way we're going to do this is by developing the problem called the interpolated traffic assignment problem, wherein we're just going to take a convex combination between the system optimum and user equilibrium objectives, with the idea being that we're able to get the efficiency gains of the system optimum assignment and the fairness gains of the user equilibrium assignment. So essentially, just to summarize what we've done so far, we wanted to solve this so-called optimum holy grail problem of the beta unfair system optimum. But because it's hard to solve, we're developing an approximation of it called the interpolated traffic assignment, which is given by the following problem that I have at the bottom of the slide. And now the key question for us to really understand is, what is the right interpolating parameter alpha that is going to guarantee me, firstly, a feasible solution to this beta unfair system optimum problem, which is it's going to guarantee me that my unfairness is no more than beta. And secondly, it's going to return amongst all those set of feasible solutions, the traffic assignment with the lowest total travel time possible, right? So that's going to be the agenda moving forward. So in particular, the way we're going to evaluate the efficacy of our approach is by looking at how, or sort of at least to begin with, certain upper bounds in the performance of our approach in terms of both efficiency and fairness, which sort of relates to how well our approach would do in terms of both of these metrics. And so firstly, I'll just present the efficiency result. So what you can see here is just an upper bound for how, as we vary the convex combination parameter alpha, the maximum possible inefficiency ratio that can be achieved for our approach for a given transportation network. And the more general formula is what I have at the bottom of the slide. But essentially what this is saying is that for a given convex combination parameter, let's say 0.5, for this particular traffic network, we would get a particular inefficiency ratio. That is, our approach would never get a worse inefficiency ratio than this particular bound, right? So that's as far as evaluating efficiency is concerned from a theoretical perspective. And secondly, what we can also say is develop a guarantee on the unfairness of our particular mechanism, which, and essentially this plot, the way to interpret this is that if we want to achieve an unfairness of, let's say, 3 within our system, then any convex combination parameter of less than 0.5, which is we're closer to the user equilibrium than the system optimum, would guarantee us that we would achieve an unfairness of 3. And this result holds for polynomial travel time functions, which are very commonly used, such as the BPR function. So essentially what these sort of theoretical results tell us is it provides at least bounds on the performance that our approach can achieve in trying to achieve a good solution to this beta SO problem that we originally wanted to solve in terms of the feasibility, which is it's on the right. That is, we can always get a feasible solution to the problem. And on the left, what we have is about the efficiency, which is we want to find a traffic assignment with the lowest travel time possible. So now, having presented some of the theory, I just want to present a few numerical results. So what we did was we simulated our algorithm on 6 different traffic networks. And what I have plotted here are some Pareto frontiers, which compare the inefficiency ratio to the level of unfairness. And the bottom line message from these plots is that for low levels of unfairness, which is really the region that we would want to operate in within the real world, our approach tends to achieve lower inefficiency ratios as compared to a state-of-the-art algorithm, which is depicted in red. And this is very encouraging because our method is also very efficiently computable and thus is in fact easy to deploy in practice. Now, one more thing I want to mention is that for these 3 cities that I have at the top, In fact, what you can see is that pretty much for all levels of unfairness, our approach outperforms the state of the art in terms of the level of efficiency of the system or the level of or the total travel times. And this further motivates the application of our approach. So I guess just to, in some sense, summarize what I've mentioned to you so far is developing an algorithmic approach to balance both efficiency and fairness in traffic routing. But one other interesting feature about our methodology, because we take the convex combination of these of the user equilibrium and the system optimum traffic assignment, is that in fact we can rewrite our interpolated traffic assignment problem as a special case of a user equilibrium traffic assignment, which yields a very natural pricing scheme that would in fact implement these fairness constraint flows in practice. And I'm not going to go into all those details here, but the bottom line message here is that if all users in our society are homogeneous, that is, they have exactly the same values of time, then in fact, a form of interpolated marginal cost tolls would end up enforcing the fairness constraint flows that we would want to implement in practice. And the reason why we call it interpolated is because we have this convex combination parameter alpha in front of the marginal cost term, which some of you might be familiar with. And I just want to finally note that, in fact, we can even generalize our pricing scheme to beyond the setting of homogeneous users to even the setting of heterogeneous users, where users have different values of time, but that requires a little more effort. And so I defer the proof of that to the paper. So just to summarize this particular work, what we developed was a computationally efficient method to route traffic that helps balance both fairness and efficiency. We combined that with a road tolling scheme and eventually got a mechanism that we can in fact deploy in terms of trying to balance both efficiency and fairness in traffic routing. So maybe I'll just quickly pause here in case there are any quick questions just before I move to the next topic.
There are no questions so far.
Okay, perfect. So I guess what I've presented so far has been a particular method wherein we only look at congestion pricing from the lens of just trying to improve the way we toll certain roads. But in fact, we can also look at congestion pricing from a slightly different perspective, wherein we seek to use the collected tolls and say refund those to the right groups of users to in fact improve equity outcomes. And this has actually been a topic that has been explored for more than 3 decades now. In fact, there's been a lot of work on designing congestion pricing with revenue refunding schemes, which I will call CPRR from now on as a shorthand. However, one thing to note is that there really has been no thorough characterization of the wealth inequality effects of such CPRR schemes. And as a result, it's hard to think of how would you optimize if you wanted to think of improving equity outcomes to the maximum extent possible. How would you optimize the design of these CPRR schemes to get the most equity gains that are possible? So essentially, in this context, the purpose of this particular work was to study the wealth inequality effects of CPRR schemes in the context of non-atomic congestion games. And our goal was to design CPRR schemes that try to improve both efficiency as well as equity outcomes in society. And we wanted to do so under a specific constraint that no user should be worse off after the implementation of the scheme than prior to the implementation of the scheme. And this is essentially depicted with the following diagram, wherein the travel cost of all users after the implementation of the CPRR scheme is lower, or in some sense no higher than that in, say, the no toll or refund setting, or in the status quo setting where we have a particular congestion pricing policy in place. So the bottom line is that we want to have some sort of an individual rationality condition in place to make sure that users accept the scheme that we end up deploying, such that despite the fact that we're trying to improve both efficiency and equity outcomes. So this is the bottom line of what we want to achieve. And I'll just quickly go through some of our modeling assumptions, which is that we're going to group users based on a few different characteristics, which is we'll first group them by their origin destination pairs. For users between the same OD pair, we will group users based on those who have similar values of time, and finally, those who have similar levels of income. And having done so, we've formed the notion of a so-called user group. And furthermore, what we need to define is what does the cost function of users look like when we also add refunds, because this looks a little different than the setting I've described to you earlier. And in this context, we're going to model the cost function of users as a linear function of their travel time, the tolls, and the refunds. And in particular, given a flow X on a particular edge, the travel time is just going to be given by T of X for that edge. And then we can define the travel cost for a given user group as a function of the tolls and the refunds to be as follows. The travel time component is given by the value of time of users multiplied by the travel time that they incur on the path that they travel on, plus the tolls that they pay on the path that they travel on, as well as we're going to subtract the level of refunds that they receive, because that is sort of a gain to the users rather than a loss. And therefore we subtract the refunds. So this is the cost function that we're going to use when we're going to be analyzing sort of user objectives in this particular context. And the way we're going to now evaluate our CPRR schemes that we develop is going to be using two metrics. Similar to that in the previous paper, though our metrics are slightly different. So in particular, our efficiency metric that we choose here, instead of optimizing for the total travel time, which we had done in the previous work, out here, because we are explicitly incorporating the values of times of users in this particular context, we're going to instead evaluate efficiency through the total system cost of a traffic assignment, which is essentially just the value of time weighted travel times of all users, which is, in other words, this is just the value of time of a user times their travel time, and we just sum this across all users in the system, right? So this is the efficiency notion that we're going to use in this work. And secondly, now, in order to evaluate the fairness or the equity of our scheme, we're explicitly going to be investigating the wealth inequality of our mechanism. So this is different than the fairness notion that we'd used earlier. And the way we're going to do this is by first investigating the ex post income distribution of users, which is the income of users after they've completed their trip. So the way to define the ex post income distribution given a tolling and refunding scheme tau R is given by what is their income prior to their trip, given by this QG0, and we just subtract off the travel costs that they incur during the trip. So this is the ex post income distribution, or the level of income that they're left with after the completion of their trip. And the way we evaluate the level of wealth inequality is by just looking at the inequality of corresponding to this ex post income distribution after we've implemented a CPRR scheme, and we compare to how does this wealth inequality measure compared to the wealth inequality of the ex post income distribution given no tolls or refunds. That is, have we improved wealth inequality outcomes having implemented our CPRR scheme or not, right? So that is going to be the notion of wealth inequality that we're going to be using for this particular context. Now, as far as our results are concerned, so as I mentioned earlier, we're going to restrict to the class of user favorable schemes as we want to make sure that users are acceptable or users accept the schemes that we end up deploying. And the first main result is that, in fact, for the class of schemes that are user favorable, we can design so-called Pareto improving schemes that simultaneously improve both efficiency and equity outcomes in society. And this is relative to the status quo. We can, in fact, get both efficiency and equity gains. And this essentially goes to the initial sort of topic that I was mentioning about the fact that we can, in fact, achieve both efficiency and equity goals of sustainable transportation by the design of such Pareto improving schemes. Now, in fact, what we can do is we can even make a stronger claim, which is by designing or characterizing the set of so-called optimal CPRR schemes. And it is not a priori obvious that such schemes even exist. But what we're able to show is that, in fact, there are schemes at which you can achieve the maximum efficiency gains possible which is basically the schemes with the lowest total travel time, while also achieving the lowest wealth inequality outcomes that are possible among the set of all user favorable CPRR schemes. So this is essentially sort of the main characterization result of this particular paper, wherein we're able to show that both efficiency and equity meet in the context of, as long as we design our congestion pricing with revenue refunding schemes appropriately. And essentially what our characterization result does is it gives us, at least at a very high level, gives us a nice two-step procedure on how we could deploy a so-called optimal scheme. And such a scheme essentially involves, as a first step, let's compute the optimal congestion prices that induces a traffic flow pattern with the minimum total cost or the maximum efficiency in our system. And secondly, we'd want to use the collected revenues and optimally refund those while satisfying the user favorability condition I mentioned, which guarantees the individual rationality of users in the system. So overall, what we've done within this work is we've tried to make progress towards both the equity and efficiency goals of sustainable transportation. And in doing so, our hope is that we're now able to, at least to some extent, transition some of the attitudes, the negative attitudes towards congestion pricing because of the inequity impacts of road tolls, to now really focusing on, well, can we design congestion pricing schemes that are more equitable by using refunds more appropriately and giving those to the right groups of people. So just to quickly wrap up, just some future work. So I think that there are certain assumptions that we do use within our works that can be made more practical in many ways. So for instance, there are now some very interesting programs that have started by, say, San Mateo County very recently about deploying credits. So basically using the collected revenues and giving credits to certain groups of users. So in fact, such refunding schemes are in fact going on in practice. It's just a matter of trying to think of how we can more practically deploy those, because they're restricting to certain groups of people only who can receive these credits. And we don't have any such restriction in our sort of setup. And so the question is, can we generalize this to more I guess, practically deployable mechanisms like the one that San Mateo County is currently employing in practice in the operation of its express lanes. Another aspect of our works is that in order to design these optimal congestion pricing schemes, as with most other works in congestion pricing, you require information on, say, users' origin destination demands, their values of time, and so on, so that you can actually devise these optimal schemes. So the question is, can we also derive and design optimal congestion pricing schemes under private or incomplete information of users? And in both of these threads, we actually have some ongoing work in that context. And finally, just a final note is that at times we may really want to use refunds for different set of tasks, like, say, investing in public transit, improving tolling infrastructure, and so on, beyond just giving transfers to users. And many of these are actually currently in place, like improving public transit and so on. And so the question is that, can we actually still derive similar results as to those obtained in our paper, even in these contexts where we're sort of working on different types of infrastructure? So yeah, I guess I will wrap up with that. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. And yeah, I guess thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Devansh. Thank you, Marco, for the great talk. I'll now jump to the questions. There are many. I think there is an interesting discussion going on. I'll start from the first one. At some point you were presenting a cost and you were dividing an expression by both value of time and income. And somebody is asking, are those two things are they not highly correlated?
Yes, that is definitely true. So I'm not sure which exact slide it's being referred to. I wonder if it's probably when I presented the wealth inequality measure or something.
Yes.
But I guess, so the thing is that those are definitely highly correlated. In this work, we've not assumed any such correlation, but we can obtain stronger results when they are correlated. So we do have some results in our work, which under the assumption that these are perfectly correlated, we can make much stronger claims. That is, in fact, you could improve wealth inequality, not just with respect to the ex post income distribution, but also with respect to the ex ante income distribution. That is, in like the bottom line here is that you can make much stronger claims theoretically if you do assume the correlation. That's the bottom line. Yeah.
Okay, I see. Then there is another question. I find it interesting. It is there a fairness metric that looks at disparities in travel costs only, so without the monetary terms? Because the point is, would the high income individuals essentially buy off the fast routes from the low income individuals?
So I would say that just going back to our fairness metric here, right? So our fairness metric here is just looking at the ratio of travel times of users. So this does not include the monetary component at all, right? So we're not including tolls at all. So you can almost think of travel time as being your quality of service in the system. So we're just comparing different users' quality of service. So in some sense, if somebody who's very wealthy gets a travel time of, I guess, 18 in this example, and somebody who is very, say, not as wealthy gets a travel time of 50, we're just looking at the ratio of their travel times, not incorporating monetary units here.
Okay, I see. The people that are asking the questions in the meantime can comment and see if they're satisfied with the answers. I think there is another question that connects to what I also was wondering, and so the question here was about asking the following: is the responsibility of the road authority to correct for income disparities in society? But I'll extend it with my point. So where do you see this work placed in the bigger picture of having the intermodal mobility system? So this is for a particular mode willing to operate both more efficiently and more fairly. But how do you see this working with multiple modes, authorities needing to put incentives for these algorithms to be implemented? So how do you collocate your work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think just going back to sort of the future work slide, right? So essentially what I think is that in practice, what is going to happen is that much of these, say, collected toll revenues, for instance, they're going to be used for essentially to fund these different modes of transport, like public transit, maybe even micromobility services and so on, right? So I personally think that there does need to be a lot of work that needs to be done from that perspective to see how would investing in these different forms of transit really influence people's outcomes. Now, I would say the bottom line policy message, if you had to take one from our congestion pricing with revenue refunding paper, would be essentially that the role of refunds can be very important in improving equity outcomes, right? At a very high level, that is the policy message. And what we're able to make are some interesting theoretical claims, but of course, you have to take that with a grain of salt in terms of applying it in practice. So I think that there is definitely a lot of work that needs to be done, especially with different forms of transit. And now, one thing I do want to mention, like for instance, in this more sort of the first point I mentioned about the San Mateo County implementing these credit-like systems to certain groups of users. So essentially, the point is that if you're below a certain income threshold, they're giving you certain credits to use the express lane, which you would otherwise probably not have had enough money to be able to use. And so I definitely think that such mechanisms have a lot of bite in practice. And because you mentioned about intermodal transit, in fact, the use of these express lanes, if you're using a bus or if you're using sort of carpools, right? So if you're like more than 3 users in a given car, then using the express lanes is free, right? So I definitely think that there is a lot that is currently sort of, there's a very ripe area in terms of, I guess, a lot of work still needs to be done in this particular context. And yeah, so that's.
And if I may add, related to the first part of the question, yeah, I agree. I don't think the role of the Transportation Authority is to correct for income disparities. I think the role is to avoid the exacerbation of income disparities. And that's the premise of the work we are presenting here.
Okay, thank you very much. Very cool work. I think those were the questions. I therefore thank you again, guys, for starting off your day, Marco in California and Devansh, your midday in DC. It was great having you here.